Hello, I'm Susan Elliott, the News and Special Reports Editor for Musical America. Today we are speaking with Michelle Miller-Burns. She is the President and CEO of the Minnesota Orchestra. Minnesota has just brought in a new music director, Thomas Søndergård. Thomas arrives in full next season. Right now he is their designate. But he comes after Osmo Vänskä, who was music director for nearly 2 decades. I wanted to talk to Michelle about the process of bringing in a new music director, preparing the orchestra for that, and how the whole process works, especially during a pandemic. I want to welcome you and thank you for talking to us today. I want to set up a little bit of a timeline. You arrived as CEO in September of 2018.
That's right.
When you got there, Osmo Vänskä announced that he would be stepping down after what, 19 years?
Exactly right.
Within what, a few months of your arrival, no?
Yeah, the announcement was in December of 2018.
So that's a good way to get started. You had your work cut out for you right away. Tell us about the process and how you prioritize things and put things together and all those good things.
Yeah, so starting at the beginning of that process was the announcement in December of 2018 that Osmo would conclude his tenure with the Minnesota Orchestra at the end of the 21-22 season, so in August of 2022. And what a gift it was that he gave us such a good lead time. From 2018 to 2022 to identify and plan for his successor. So we formed a search committee that was comprised of musicians, board members, staff, and a member of the community. It was chaired by a member of the board. And we set to work right away to think about what are the characteristics and qualities of someone that we would like to have as our next music director, thinking about the strategic direction of the organization, and then starting to identify who some of those prospective candidates might be. And ultimately, we identified about 60 candidates and brought a couple dozen candidates onto the stage of Orchestra Hall to lead the orchestra during the search process.
Did you say 60 or 16 candidates?
60.
Oh my gosh. How many people were on the search committee, and how was that? What was the ratio of musicians to board to staff? And
yes.
Yeah.
So there were 16 members of the committee, and of those, there were 5 musicians, 7 board members, a member of the community, and 3 staff colleagues.
Where did these candidates come from?
Oh gosh, they came from lots of different sources. The musicians on the search committee were central to this process.
Right.
So we, wanted intentionally to have a robust list to start with. And so it was individuals, conductors that we had worked with before here at the Minnesota Orchestra, and then many whom we hadn't, where we didn't have a relationship. There were conductors that musicians of our orchestra had worked with elsewhere, or had heard really favorable things about. Maybe some people who were kind of up and coming in career that we might not be familiar with, but we wanted to get to know. So we did start with that very broad list, and just through a series of conversations, narrowed that list to the about 20 for a couple of dozen conductors who we invited to conduct the Minnesota Orchestra on our subscription series.
Now you've got a couple of dozen. Okay, and where are we with regard to the pandemic at this point?
Yeah, so we were right before the pandemic, and we had then scheduled those conductors to come over the course of the next couple of seasons. Well, then in March of 2020, obviously the world changed.
Yeah.
Our industry changed in very significant ways. And for a full year, we were not able to have guest artists and guest conductors on our stage. So we didn't pause the process. We continued to learn more about the conductors that we had invited to come. We worked to reschedule them with us. Of course, at the time, not really knowing when could that happen, when would the pandemic protocols lighten enough that we could have conductors, guest conductors back on stage? When would we be back to having a full orchestra performing? And so it was just a kind of a constant navigation process. It took a lot of patience and persistence. When we were able to bring conductors, guest conductors back on stage, we had a robust group of conductors come and be on the podium here.
How many of them had worked with the orchestra before?
A number of them had, but it was split. Again, some people who we had a relationship with and some people that we did not. And Susan, one of the things that I think is a wonderful outcome of this process, in addition to having Thomas Søndergård as our next music director, is having developed relationships with a number of conductors that we want to continue to get to know over time. And that, I think, is really kind of working on parallel tracks there. So it was a wonderful discovery and relationship building process too.
As part of the screening process, in addition to working with the musicians, what else was he asked to do?
So he and other candidates were asked to meet with the search committee. At first, in a very informal setting, just kind of a post-concert gathering and toast, and an opportunity for that very casual conversation. And then in the later stages of the search, actually sitting down with the search committee and having a robust dialogue in a search committee member's home around a fire. It was all very, very convivial and relaxed and informal, and I think gave us a really good sense of, in this case, who Thomas is as a person. How would he engage with members of the audience, with community, with donors? And that just gave us a really high confidence in the fact that he would be a great choice as our next music director.
Coming back to Minnesota and knowing that the orchestra was not really aware, of course it's an exciting moment. I of course hope that they would be as excited as I was about the announcement, and that was surely clear. When they were told that we were going to have a closer relationship, I stood outside the door, and while I was walking in I could hear the cheering. And that's, of course, a moment that will stick with me for a long, long time. It's an enormous luxury for me to actually take over an ensemble that is in such great shape, that is in such great spirit. So actually, it feels to me as if it's just finding the right way to place my arm around the shoulders of this orchestra, and we'll continue the journey that is already so well on its way.
Let's talk a little bit about the recent negotiations. You all just have a new contract, yeah?
We do, that's right, a 4-year agreement.
And how did that go? And was it early, late? Did you have to spend a lot of time back and forth across the table? How did it go?
Well, so when I'm going to take a step back, Susan, when I first got here, we were in the midst of the previous contract that was due to expire in August of 2020. So in the winter of 2019-2020, we started the conversations around what would that next contract look like. So we had some good lead time there. Well, of course, in March, COVID hit. And so by mutual agreement, we said, gosh, let's just step away from this for a short time. And because we knew that we had other priorities, just things that had to happen right away so that we could keep functioning as an organization. So I was really grateful to the musician leaders on the negotiating team who said, go ahead, focus your time over here, and we'll come back to the negotiation of the multi-year contract. So that's what we did. And then we did come back to that process and decided that given the unique circumstances that we were all in this industry experiencing, let's focus in on a COVID side letter instead of negotiating terms of a multi-year contract. So we did that collaboratively, members of staff and musician negotiating team members worked together to negotiate those terms for the first year of the pandemic. And at that same time, proposed a 2-year extension to the current collective bargaining agreement. So the agreement that was in place when I arrived stayed in place through August of 2022. What we did was create these 2 side letters, one in each year of the pandemic, that just gave us some additional guidelines, some additional flexibility in working together. And so then in what would have been the spring of 2022, we started the negotiations for this next multi-year agreement, which resulted in the 4-year contract.
Right. And I imagine that some of the considerations in the side contracts during COVID, I'm thinking mostly about streaming, were incorporated into the new agreement?
Those were certainly part of the discussions around what the new agreement would look like, because of course, the orchestra world has changed a bit. And we know that we have an opportunity with streaming and engaging with audiences who aren't physically present here at Orchestra Hall. And our musicians have been just right on the forefront of that to say, this is important. And just kind of as a side note, Susan, one of the things that I appreciate so much about our This is Minnesota Orchestra series, those are our live streamed concerts in partnership with Twin Cities Public Television and Your Classical NPR here in Minnesota, that partnership has really allowed us to expand the visibility and the stature of the Minnesota Orchestra over the last couple of years. And our musicians said, yes, this is important, and let's continue to do this. So even though we are back, fortunately, to in-person audiences, we know that this is an and statement, that it isn't, gosh, we're back to in-person audiences, so let's just set all that digital initiative aside. It really is something where we find that it's a way for us to help elevate and raise the visibility of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota.
Are those broadcasts free, or are they subscription series, or how do they work?
Yeah, so they are, the broadcast, the live streams are free as they happen, and for the week following the performance. And then they do become a benefit of a digital subscription here.
Well, I want to come and see Thomas Søndergård in action live. I mean, that's going to be a terrific partnership with you all. So best of luck with it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.